We're here to solve the Slitherlink puzzle by John Bulten. It has a clock theme, and I'm just going to, for my own solving, turn on surface and composite so I can be shading some cells in. The clock theme is thinking about base 12 numbers, it looks like, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 coming up all the way to 12, and this 3, 0. The other thing I'm noticing is that there are clues in the grid that represent 13 and 14 and 15 and 16, so it looks like there's a series, and also clues that are 0, 1. 2 and 3 that are sort of on their own. But that series from 1 to 16, including this somewhat awkward looking 100, is probably part of the pattern John had in mind. And it's one of the reasons in standard Slitherlink we almost never would allow zeros to be put right next to each other. So it's an elegant and quick sort of blocking off of a lot of the grid, but it's part of the series from 1 to 16 that's in the grid. I'm going to just quickly mark a lot of things we know for sure. And I think one of the things that was actually key in this puzzle in general was shading what's inside and outside the loop. And there are lots of places where we've got some pinned cells that are going to force common patterns to come out. For instance, as this edge comes in, it comes to a 3, 3 pattern, which is always an S shape. We now actually have marked all of these cells as unusable. So this 3 in the corner is pretty pinned. It's got to come to this. We actually have a case where we couldn't take this edge because we'd now be stranded. And so this end keeps going out, this bottom end keeps going out, so they avoid each other. But now this bottom has to keep extending, this top one has to deflect. We've got a 3, 3 diagonal pattern, which always starts with the opposite edges being used, these 4 edges, but we've now intersected that, so we're going to get a forced 3 shape like this. And with this end down here also now isolated, we get a forced shape like this. And more cells continuing. One more easy thing before we turn over to shading of what's inside outside is we need to get one more end up into this upper right space, and around the channels you'll see, and I'm just right clicking to mark off these edges. These edges must be used. This is the only way to get another link into this upper right, and in doing so we form a quick closure. And so this is a lot of the fast part of the loop that you can put into the grid. I'm going to mark in green all cells that are for sure inside the loop right now. Because we can't come down further here, like this cell is for sure inside, but the cell above it is not known for sure what it is. These cells that are wrapping right next to an edge and are the opposite of cells that are known to be outside the loop, I'll mark those in blue, are ones we can mark. So these are all the ones I know I can mark. I can mark this one, but again, not the one below it. And so the first place that the inside-outside counts will matter for the even-odd constraints is probably at this point in the puzzle. For instance, in this column I'm looking at now, I've got 5 inside, I've got 4 outside. I need to make that 6 plus 4, which are both even splits. Another place where I can do that math right now is in this lowermost row. Around this 2, there are 2 options. One is in a corner, which are these. Both of those options have an extension out, and so I actually know that these cells are inside the loop, and so I actually have 9 in the loop with 1 unknown, and that will always have to stay in the loop to be 10 plus 0 for inside outside. And get this, I now have a case where I've got edges I can't use, so I can just mark them in, and you'll see as I do that that I have a pretty good set of cells in the loop versus out of the loop. That will be informative. I'm just going to color in the last ones I know and haven't marked yet. This row up here has an option for a single cell, but every time I'm looking and seeing a non-colored cell that's the only one left in the row, I can quickly specify it. In this case, it's got to be inside the loop, so we get 4 in and 6 out. The option of 3 and 7 was no good. I've hit this 3, so I can mark this pattern in. Notice that I then can't use this edge, and notice that that means I can't then use this edge on the 1, and that's going to actually now isolate some of these cells. And so a key step here is to be able to mark that these are inside the loop. There's an either-or pattern where one but not both of the cells that are near the 3, 2 are inside and outside the loop. So it looks like one of the key things is to figure out if the cell is in or out. And one thing to recognize, this is where we're tied to being near this one clue here. This edge on the bottom is going to cause problems because it's going to quickly deflect the loop, but we're going to isolate this too. And so a different way to see this is after we had a single line section coming into this corner of the 2, there's always going to need to be a single line segment going out of the opposite corner of the 2. And that pattern is maybe not as easy to show right now at this stage of the puzzle, but with this corner having one in, there's only one place this side has one out. And that is a standard Slitherlink deduction. We get that this cell is inside the loop. And now let's come back to this whole row. We've got 7 in that are in green already. One of these, but not both of these, is in, which will get us to 8, and there'll be one that's outside. And that means this 2 is also outside, and we can mark that in for sure right now and pretty quickly. We know that this edge below the 1 isn't used, and so a question now is how do we get, if we get more around this, where does that last piece go? And a way to think through this is probably to consider the remainder of these cells. And notice that both of these can't be outside the loop, but if they're not both inside the loop, if you have a 1-1 split, we're going to get 3 and 7 is how this breaks down. So these both go together. Here's a case where we've got 2 cells, but they both go together, and there's not an option for them to both be outside, because that would require this to be the loop shape, and that's not possible. So they're both inside. And with them both being inside, we get that this top edge isn't part of the 1. We actually have closed this loop, and coming back to the Slitherlink constraints, we come up down here. This comes across, this comes across. We're going to quickly be shading in some known cells inside, some known cells outside. We've got now 2 more singletons in the rows and columns. In this case, we've got 6 in the row, so we can't put 1 more inside the loop. In this case, we've got 5 in the column, so this must be inside the loop. And we get these, we'll draw the edges across the color changes. We've got a little to go in the upper left corner, and this may be the last sort of tricky step of the puzzle. It's going to start by seeing that we have, again, 2 cells that must be the same, whether they're both in or both outside the loop. And if they're both inside the loop, one of the things that's going to actually do is quickly force this edge right here, which will put all of the remaining cells to have to be inside the loop. So if this is inside, these are inside. And now we get an issue that we have to fill in edges around this too. And in drawing this, we've actually broken the normal coloring. So everything in red being inside the loop is a problem. So these are all outside of the loop. And we'll draw in these edges. The loop still has to connect through the top. And we can take 1 more, but not 2 more in this top row. This gets us an even count. 1 more, not 2 more in this next row. That gets us an even count. 1 more, not 2 more in the following row. And in the last row, we can take 1 more and not 2 more. So effectively, we've colored in the solution, but to get the answer check, we've got to put in the loop ends. And so there we go. So hopefully a pretty efficient solve of this Slitherlink even rows and columns puzzle. It did involve really just careful accounting for rows and columns, some understanding some patterns like this pattern in the corner, that while it has 2 options, or seems to, the pattern always includes some of these end bits. And in doing that, you'll start to get a sense of what's inside and outside the loop and can use those things. We also had a similar case where here we knew for sure an edge, which gave us a 1 and 1 split. We didn't know which direction was going to be inside or outside the loop, but in knowing that 1-1 split, having the rest of the cells shaded, we can mark things like the cell on the far left is unshaded or outside of the loop. And so that's the way to think through this puzzle. Hope you learned a bit about it, and we'll see you again soon.